My life has always been a fortress built on logic and code. I am Alara Hayes, 35 years old, and a vice president of innovation at one of the top 5 global technology conglomerates. My world is the clean, hyper-efficient chaos of Silicon Valley, a place where merit is the only currency. But my roots are tangled deep in the quiet, suffocating prestige of Fairfield County, Connecticut, where the currency is lineage and appearance. I deal in algorithms. My parents, Martha and Richard Hayes, deal in facades and a chilling, near-religious devotion to my younger brother, Garrett, 32. Garrett, to them, was the shining promise, perpetually on the cusp of his big break. He was the charming failure, a man who consistently swapped one doomed venture for the next. Currently, he presided over a boutique microbrewery, the Gilded Kettle, a place drowning in debt that should have legally dissolved years ago. I, the successful one, the one who navigated the treacherous waters of the tech world, was merely the silent ATM, the daughter who sent quarterly, no-strings-attached loans, and never cluttered their lives with requests. To them, my multi-million-dollar career was just Alara being Alara, a predictable background hum. Garrett's plight, however, was high-stakes drama, a narrative that demanded constant, sacrificial worship. The genesis of this final, cataclysmic betrayal began with the sale of the Lakefront cabin. That rustic, beautiful cedar house on Lake Candlewood was the only sanctuary I ever truly knew. It was where the noise of their expectations faded, where I first felt the visceral thrill of writing code on an antique terminal, creating a world governed by rules I controlled. 6 months prior, without a single call or consultation, they sold it. The pre-tax price was substantial, but after paying off the old mortgage and all closing costs, the net proceeds were $1.2 million. They had offered a flimsy excuse about simplifying the estate, but I knew the cold truth. Garrett's brewing catastrophe required a massive cash injection, and the cabin was the most liquid asset they possessed. I had mourned the loss quietly, absorbing the pain as another cost of being the unloved, stable daughter. The setting for my public execution was perfect. A summer solstice gathering, held on their sprawling lawn. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and expensive lilies. 50 guests, the entire upper echelon of their conservative social circle. Old money investors, retired judges, Richard's former real estate cohorts, all sipped imported wine, their laughter calibrated to the exact decibel of polite superiority. I arrived late, meticulously dressed in a custom-tailored, dark graphite suit, a deliberate contrast to the guests' breezy linens and pastel summer dresses. I felt like a foreign object, a solid piece of steel among silk. I observed Martha, my mother, flitting between tables, her smile a brittle mask, her hand constantly resting on Garrett's shoulder as she exaggerated the innovative challenges of his failing brewery. Garrett, slightly red-faced and overly animated from celebratory drinking, looked like a child awaiting Santa. The moment of judgment came as the sun dipped behind the western hills, painting the sky in violent shades of crimson and gold. Richard, an imposing figure even in retirement, tapped a sterling silver spoon against a cut crystal glass. The crowd hushed, the collective anticipation of a major financial announcement hanging heavy in the cool evening air. "Friends, family," Richard boomed, his voice amplified by the hidden outdoor speakers. "As many of you know, we recently concluded the sale of the Lakefront cabin." A respectful, knowing murmur rippled through the gathered elite. That property held decades of memories, but today, we honor its legacy by announcing how the proceeds, a clean $1.2 million, will be deployed. He paused, a master of timing, letting the weight of the number settle. His eyes locked onto Garrett, whose face was a study in anxious relief. Then Richard's gaze slowly moved, finding me where I stood near the rose bushes, and held my gaze for what felt like an eternity. It was a look of complete dispassion, a cold calculation that stripped me bare. "Martha and I believe in strategic investment," he declared, his words hitting every benchmark of their social code. "We believe in supporting those who have the greatest, most immediate need. Our son Garrett is on the precipice of achieving his life's dream. But a dream, as we all know, requires a substantial injection of capital to truly take flight. Therefore, we are gifting the entirety of the $1.2 million, every single last cent, to Garrett Hayes to stabilize and secure his future." The applause erupted, Immediate, loud, and utterly drowning. Garrett rushed forward, pulling my parents into a theatrical, three-way embrace. He mouthed thank you over and over, his eyes welling up with tears that might have been genuine, but felt utterly performative. Martha then stepped forward, taking the microphone from Richard. Her eyes, magnified by the cold smile she aimed directly at me, were terrifyingly clear. Alara, of course, doesn't require this kind of financial cushion, she chimed in, the condescension sharp enough to draw blood. She's built her own empire from her coding. She is stable. Garrett needs this infusion to navigate the truly challenging, creative landscape of entrepreneurship. We are investing in potential, not mere stability. Stability. The word echoed, a poison compliment. It was their dismissal of my entire existence. They had chosen the perpetual rescue mission over my proven, self-made success, and they had executed this public shaming in front of 50 of the area's most influential people. They had used the sale of the only place I ever felt safe as the stage for my humiliation. My brain, usually working at 1,000 processes per second, went utterly silent. My body felt disconnected, my heart beating in slow, heavy thuds. I raised the champagne glass, brought it to my lips, and felt the cheap, sweet fizz burn my tongue. I set the glass down with an unnerving gentleness, my eyes never leaving Garrett's relieved face. I turned slowly, walking past the clusters of guests, ignoring their shocked, curious stares. I left the party, the sound of the polite applause chasing me down the driveway, and drove back to the cold precision of the West Coast. I was no longer angry. I was surgically, profoundly calm. Back in my minimalist penthouse, the initial shock gave way to a chilling, analytical realization. The $1.2 million was a trifle, a public insult, but financially inconsequential to my net worth. The true, structural betrayal had to be deeper, institutional, and rooted in their long-standing belief that my intellect was somehow less valuable than Garrett's fragility. The next morning, driven by a cold need for documented proof, I flew back to Stamford and marched into the office of the Hayes Trust attorney. I demanded full copies of every single financial agreement, liability waiver, and promissory note signed by either parent over the past decade that referenced the cabin, the estate, or Garrett's business ventures. I was looking for proof that they had mortgaged their future. What I found was exponentially worse. Buried within an obsolete filing box labeled GH Coffee Roasting Liabilities, 2019, was a secured promissory note. This note, executed and signed by Richard Hayes 6 years ago, during the disastrous failure of Garrett's bespoke coffee business, was not collateralized by real estate. It was collateralized by a specific piece of intellectual property IP, belonging to me, the fusion algorithm. The fusion algorithm was my groundbreaking achievement from my early 20s. It was the dynamic optimization code I had developed to revolutionize global logistics, capable of reducing processing time by 40% and cutting costs by 15%. It was a piece of software architecture that I knew, with certainty, was a $20 million asset ready for strategic launch. I had kept the full documentation and patent filing drafts secure on an offline server in the basement of the Lakefront cabin, believing the technical obscurity and the physical distance made it safe from their meddling. The note indicated that Richard, facing a deadline to cover Garrett's $500,000 debt to a predatory collection agency, had signed a temporary collateral agreement. But a notarized, handwritten addendum beneath the main text was the moment of absolute psychological trauma. Richard had not just collateralized it, he had secretly sold the perpetual rights to the algorithm, my life's work, which he had always dismissed as worthless geek scribbles, to a middling competitor, a company called Apex Dynamics, for a mere $250,000. The money went straight to cover Garrett's liabilities, making Richard feel like a hero, saving his son by destroying my future. Twist 1. The intellectual theft. The $1.2 million was the flimsy curtain. The real catastrophic betrayal occurred 6 years ago. The theft and fire sale of my multi-million-dollar IP to save Garrett's sinking ship. My own father had stolen my most valuable asset and sold it for scraps because he did not believe my work had intrinsic value. The pain was not financial. It was the violation of my intellect, the ultimate act of disrespect. I did not scream. I did not cry. The logic gate in my mind snapped shut, sealing off all emotion. I returned to my office, the legal documents laid out like a blueprint for war. I now possessed the key evidence: the original time-stamped code, the full patent drafts, and the legally damning note that proved Richard Hayes had sold property he did not legally own. The next 72 hours were spent in a hyper-focused state of intellectual warfare. I directed my top corporate forensics team to perform an exhaustive deep dive into Apex Dynamics. I already knew the company. They were a constant, irritating blip in the sector, managing to win key government contracts they shouldn't have. My investigation revealed the terrifying, satisfying truth. Apex Dynamics' recent, explosive growth and their entire competitive edge, their much-hyped Streamline engine, was built entirely on my stolen, 6-year-old Fusion algorithm. They were a multi-billion-dollar operation built on a foundation of my stolen code. Twist 2. The weapon of vengeance. The IP they stole wasn't just a lost asset. It was the single point of structural integrity for an entire publicly traded corporation. By reclaiming it, I could not only bankrupt Apex Dynamics, but inflict maximum collateral damage on Richard's entire network of influential cronies. I launched the final phase, codenamed Operation Aura Acquisition. As the vice president overseeing my company's strategic acquisition fund, I had the power, the resources, and the legal shield necessary for true, surgical vengeance. First, my legal team filed a massive, meticulously documented IP infringement lawsuit against Apex Dynamics, demanding a complete cease and desist on their Streamline engine, and seeking billions in damages based on years of illicit profit. The core of the filing was the notarized proof that Richard Hayes, lacking any legal ownership rights, had committed fraud by selling my personal IP. Second, simultaneously, I used my company's fund to execute a strategic, hostile takeover of one of Apex Dynamics' key software suppliers. The market instantly saw the threat. Apex Dynamics, facing a fatal IP lawsuit that would render their product worthless, and losing a critical supply chain partner, became instantly toxic. Their stock, built on a lie, plummeted by 75% in less than 3 days. But the most precise act of corporate retribution was yet to come. Richard, in his confident retirement, had invested nearly his entire pension, $800,000, in a high-risk commodities fund managed by his longtime friend and business partner, Kenneth Stone. Kenneth Stone was not just Richard's friend. He was the broker who had facilitated the original, fraudulent sale of my IP to Apex Dynamics. He had subsequently invested heavily in Apex Dynamics, knowing their success hinged on my stolen code. As Apex Dynamics stock collapsed, I made a few discreet, aggressive moves in the thinly traded derivatives market, leveraging my firm's immense liquidity. We executed a series of financial maneuvers that deliberately destabilized one of Kenneth Stone's illiquid assets, forcing a massive, immediate margin call on his fund. Kenneth, in a desperate attempt to cover the call and save his reputation, was forced to liquidate his remaining, highly concentrated, and now worthless holdings in Apex Dynamics. The result was a spectacular, immediate failure of Kenneth Stone's fund, which evaporated Richard's entire $800,000 pension with it. Twist 3. The financial domino effect. I had used my professional mastery of the corporate ecosystem to not only reclaim my algorithm, but to dismantle the entire, intertwined network of greed, complicity, and disrespect. I bankrupted my father's retirement and destroyed his broker's career, all without ever once speaking his name publicly. Within 2 months, Apex Dynamics was dead, acquired for a fraction of its former value by my firm, solely for the purpose of legally cleaning up the IP rights and dissolving the entity. The Fusion algorithm was mine again. It was a relic compared to my current work, but the principle was the ultimate victory. Richard and Martha lost everything. Their large house was sold under duress to cover outstanding loans related to Garrett's brewery, which, lacking the promised $1.2 million, had finally, mercifully, collapsed in a torrent of bad reviews and overwhelming debt. The final communication came on a Thursday night. My private line rang. It was Richard, his voice unrecognizable, thin, raw, and utterly broken by shock. He sounded like a frightened old man, not the imposing figure who had stood on that lawn. "Alara, please," he pleaded, the words catching in his throat. "The pension is gone. The house is gone. Garrett is destitute. How could you stand by and allow this to happen? You could have stopped it. You have the connections, the power. You could have salvaged Kenneth's fund. You could have saved my retirement. I sat back in my chair, looking out at the glittering landscape of human ingenuity I had helped create. My voice, usually quick and precise, was slow, measured, and utterly devoid of warmth. I deal in logic, Father. You publicly humiliated me and gave away the $1.2 million that represented my childhood home. That was a vulgar, painful display, but ultimately forgivable. What you did 6 years ago, however, was unforgivable. You stole my intellectual property, my creation, my future, and sold it for $250,000 to save Garrett's trivial coffee business. You thought my coding was worthless, disposable, a cheap commodity you could trade for real-world money. I paused, letting the cold, hard reality of the cause and effect sink in. I didn't let this happen, Father. I ensured it happened. I spent a lifetime building a fortress of professional competence. You and Mother taught me the price of everything and the value of nothing. You sold my $20 million algorithm for $250,000. I used my expertise and my company's resources to recover my stolen asset, and in the process, I systematically guaranteed that the entire compromised, corrupt ecosystem, including the broker who enabled your crime and the fund that held your future, collapsed under the pressure of financial gravity. You traded my intellectual property for Garrett's hobby. I traded your entire financial life for my professional silence. That is the true return on your investment in potential. I ended the call. The clean, quiet click of the receiver was the sound of a loop closing, a perfect line of code executed. The retribution was complete, absolute, and logically sound.